I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of Old's Oscar Countdown. And this week we're going to be continuing our breakdown of the predictions for the 2024 Oscars by breaking down my predictions as to what I think will get nominated for 3 Oscar categories. And we're nearing the end of the year, we're really into the thick of the Oscar season, which is why this video is going to be essentially my last video. I'm going to be doing one more about the Best Documentary category. But once I've done that video, I will have covered all of these sort of major Oscar categories aside from the shorts in one of my videos. So if you want to hear my thoughts on some of these technical categories, like score, like sound, like costume design, they're not my final predictions. I'll be giving my final predictions right before the Oscar nominations are announced. If that's being a Tuesday, the Thursday before that, or the Friday before that, where I'll give my predictions on all of them. But in that video, I won't talk about individual thoughts and predictions. But what I find unique and different about my channel is that I do have those videos. I do have a 20-minute long video about the score and song categories and my thoughts and reasoning behind them, because I think that's important. Because I think that when you're trying to nail your predictions, giving the same amount of thought to a technical category as you do for the acting categories, while it may not be as flashy, ultimately helps you get better overall scores. So that's what these videos are. So if you appreciate this and the deep dive that I do, because maybe you don't want to do the deep dive and you just want to listen to my thoughts about it and then make up your own decisions, that's totally okay. But if you appreciate that, please do comment below, let me know your predictions, your thoughts, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future videos. But we're still a couple weeks away from the Oscar nominations. So in the meantime, I'm still going to be doing regular videos, but they're going to transform a little bit more into reactions and predictions for other award shows. I'm going to be reacting to the shortlists next week. There's going to be the Critics' Choice Awards and Golden Globes. I'm going to be predicting and reacting to those awards and how that ultimately affects the race. But in terms of the analysis of these categories, this will be the sort of last one until my final nominations, aside from that Best Documentary video. But with that out of the way, the categories I'm going to be looking at this week are the Best International Feature category, the Best Editing category, and the Best Visual Effects category. So starting off with my predictions for the Best International Feature category, my first prediction is going to go to The Zone of Interest. And it makes sense because I expect this movie to get nominated, or at least be in contention for a Best Picture nomination, so therefore naturally it will get nominated for Best International Feature. Why am I so confident in the film? First of all, it won the Grand Prix at Cannes, which is the sort of #2 runner-up prize, so high festival acclaim, played at TIFF, other festivals as well. Lots of great critical reviews. You have an auteur as the director in Jonathan Glazer, who's well respected and has done many other great films. So it has the critical appeal. It's got a name brand director behind it, so I think there's an added appreciation of this being an important film within his overall filmography and his overall career. It's got A24 campaigning it, and A24 last year, won a bunch of Oscars, won all the acting awards for The Whale and Everything Everywhere All at Once, and did very well, and has won Best Picture before. So they know how to campaign a movie, and I think they're going to do that very well with The Zone of Interest, particularly by appealing to the Academy and some of their more sophisticated tastes. So Zone of Interest I expect to get nominated here because I expect it to also get nominated for Best Picture. Then my second prediction is going to go to Society of the Snow, which is the latest film from J.A. Bayona, who you may be aware of for directing the second Jurassic World movie, Fallen Kingdom, but he also has done other films, including a really excellent disaster film called The Impossible, which got Naomi Watts an Oscar nomination. And here he sort of returns back to those roots, doing another disaster movie based on a true story of this Uruguayan plane who crashes into the Andes. It's a very thrilling, exciting story. It's also importantly distributed by Netflix, and this is Netflix's big international film this year. And Netflix does very well in this category. As a matter of fact, if you look at the past 5 years, Netflix had one of their international movies nominated in this category 3 out of the last 5 years, including the last 2 years in a row, most recently last year with the winner being All Quiet on the Western Front. So they're excellent at getting their movies seen, particularly their international films seen by these voters, which is why they continually get nominated pretty much every year. So I like that. I like that it's Netflix. I like that it's J.A. Bayona, who's a respected director, who's made good films in the past and is an expert in this genre. And then also I like that it's thrilling. I like that it's entertaining. I like that it's based on a true story. So I like the availability in terms of how easy it is to watch, but then also the content and the style of film, because this is an international feature category and they're talking about just the feature, not a specific element of a movie. It helps to have a general sort of populist, entertaining, thrilling type of a film that will help Society in the Snow. And I think I'm actually somewhat strangely confident that it will get in because of all these added factors. Then in my third nomination, I'm going to go with Perfect Days. And I think this is an important prediction to make, not necessarily because of the film, but because of where the country is submitting it, where they're from. Because if you look at your predictions, I think it's very easy every year, but particularly this year, to just nominate 5 European films. To go with Fallen Leaves and Taste of Things and Teacher's Lounge and, Society of the Snow and Zone of Interest and so on and so forth. Or Io Capitano. And it's easy to do that because you've probably heard of those films, or you've heard of them because you're like me, follow the festival circuit, and you see European festivals like Cannes and Berlin and Venice sort of promote these films. So those are the films that you're most aware of. And yet every year, they're not all 5 films from Europe in this category. We always have one film from maybe Northern Africa or from South America or Asia. As a matter of fact, if you go through, as I did, there isn't a year in recent memory in which all 5 of the nominees have come from a European country. So that's just a long way of saying, when you're making your predictions, don't go with all 5 European nominees. It doesn't necessarily happen. So what did I go with? I went with Perfect Days. Why? Because it's got a European director, so there's still an appreciation there. Wim Wenders, who is a well-respected director, has made many great films, so I think that will help in terms of, oh, it's a Wim Wenders movie that was critically acclaimed, okay, I'll check it out. Makes it easier for people to ultimately seek out this film and watch it, because sometimes, voters will vote on this category without having seen all of the films, so sometimes having a name brand director is enough of a sort of a pull, of an intrigue for someone to ultimately want to watch that film, and then maybe if they like it, vote on it. So they have a European director, which I think helps because they still have these European sensibilities, which is why they nominate 3 or 4 of the movies that get nominated every year are usually from a European country. But also my theory as to why there's always, some other non-European film nominated in this category is because they sort of get bored. They see French and German and Italian films, and then they see a Japanese film, and then they go, oh wow, this is a totally different culture, this is a different setting. It feels different and fresh just because it stands out because of the location and the culture that it's showing off. In the same way, if you remember 2019, 2020, Luana, a Yak in the Classroom, was a film from Bhutan that got nominated. And I think it got nominated in part because people really didn't know Bhutan and its culture and what that country looked like. So the fact that there was a movie there helped it stand out and helped it be memorable, and then it gets nominated and sort of surprises. So I think there's a similar sort of aspect to that with Perfect Days. So it's got all that going for it, the sort of diversity, the fact that it'll be different than some of the other acclaimed movies that showcase Europeans. But then, of course, it's a critically acclaimed movie. The actor, Koji Yakusho, won the award for Best Actor at Cannes. It's really just him in the film in Tokyo. Very sort of meditative film, and I think there's an appreciation because of the diversity, but plus the critical acclaimed aspect of it, plus it's from a great, acclaimed European master in Wim Wenders. All that should add up to A, it being seen, but then B, we expect with the critical acclaim to be liked, and then C, ultimately because it's different than the other European films that are in contention, it will stand out, be memorable, and be nominated. And then in my 4th selection, I went with the Taste of Things. And really these last 2 slots, I think there's going to be some sort of surprise movie that gets nominated. There always is every year, but I didn't know what it was going to be, so I went pretty chalk. So I went with the Taste of Things as my prediction, which is the French selection this year. It still has a very good shot of getting nominated because starring Juliette Binoche, who's a great French star, and is a notable actor. So once again, when people are looking for these films and watching these films, there's a memorability of it because you have a face. Oh yeah, right, that's the Juliette Binoche movie. So that helps. Very well critically acclaimed. This was chosen as the French submission over Anatomy of a Fall, so clearly that committee thinks that this movie can get nominated. It's about food, so it's very sensual, but I think it's also a universal experience because everyone, of course, loves food, and there's an appreciation for that as well. So French films usually do quite well in terms of getting nominated. You have a big French star at the center of it, which makes the movie even more memorable, critically acclaimed, played well at festivals, but then also has that sort of universality because it's about food. So that's why I went with The Taste of Things. And then my fifth slot, I went with The Teacher's Lounge, which is the Germany selection this year. And when we're trying to figure out this category, the best international feature category, it's important to remember that you have to consider the entire film. And that's not necessarily true about certain technical categories. Because if you look at the costume design category, that's voted on by costume designers. And they don't really care about the overall success of the film. They're interested in the costumes. Same thing with, the visual effects, branch, for example. They'll nominate movies that maybe aren't that great or aren't going to be nominated for Best Picture, but because they have really interesting, unique visual effects, they focus on that and then they nominate it. But for the best international feature category, we're talking about the entire film. So sometimes it helps to have, so you have to consider the success of the entire film and how well it will be liked amongst a lot of people. And sometimes European films can be sort of niche and odd or slow or not necessarily traditionally American Hollywood storytelling. And as a result, I think divide people or confuse people. I think that's one reason why Decision to Leave, Park Chan-wook, was sort of snubbed last year, or Saint Omer has been snubbed, a couple years ago, or maybe that was last year too. Or anyways, because they're critically well acclaimed, but they're also a little bit more difficult, a little bit more unconventional, and they don't get nominated. And what does get nominated are the more conventional movies, the entertaining movies. And this movie, The Teacher's Lounge, is a very interesting thriller, character study, sort of a murder mystery in a way. And I think that will appeal to a lot of different cultures and a lot of different people that vote on the international feature category. I like that it's about a teacher, which is another sort of universality aspect that, these people are from all different sorts of cultures that vote in this category. So let's, try to find a commonality between them all. Teacher, that makes sense. It's a thrilling, entertaining movie, so we expect it to be a little bit more populist, a little bit more well-liked. It's not this sort of weird art house European film. The Teacher's Lounge is a thrilling, interesting, more traditional type of a Hollywood film. So I think because of the sort of content matter of the film, because it's still European, which we know this group appreciates, I think that was sort of enough for me to put it in that final slot. And then a couple of my possible contenders. The first one being Tótem, which is the Mexican entry for this year's Oscars. And similarly to something like Perfect Days, I wanted to include a possible contender that wasn't a European film. But also this film is different not only because it's Mexican and we have a different culture than some of the European films, but also in its subject matter, starring a child. So it has, immediately identifiability, recognizability, because, oh yeah, that's the movie with the child, right? Oh, okay. It's also a sweeter movie. It's got more sentimentality than something like, of course, The Zone of Interest, which is very serious and weighty. So the Academy, this branch of the Academy may want to go sophisticated with The Zone of Interest, sophisticated, serious, thrilling story with something like Society of the Snow, important, right? But then also do something that's a little bit sweet and sentimental and a different kind of a movie. Not only has it got the diversity of culture, but it's also got the diversity of sentimentality. And Mexico also has been doing recently in terms of the past 3 submissions have been shortlisted, so I expect Tótem to get shortlisted as well. And I expect it to be a real serious possible contender. If they want to go with less European films and nominate another culture, this would be right at the top of my list as to an alternative. And then my other possible contender is Fallen Leaves. It didn't show up at Critics' Choice Awards for Best Film Not in the English Language, but it did get nominated in that category for the Golden Globes. It also got a Comedy Actress nomination. So because it resonated with that awards group, indicates to me that maybe it'll be appreciated by the Oscars too. But the reason why I have it on the outside is because this is from director Aki Kaurismäki, who's been nominated in the past at the Oscars, but actually during that time in the 2000s refused to go. So I think there still could be some a bit of a grudge that those Oscar voters have because he refused an invitation to go to the Oscars. There may be a little bit of an offense that this branch has taken to him, and then they may have just written him off entirely. This is also from Mubi, so that helps because it's ultimately being seen, but last year Mubi didn't get Decision to Leave nominated, so maybe they're just not targeting the right people. Hard to say for sure, but Fallen Leaves is definitely a contender because it's one of the most critically acclaimed European films of the year, and that's always a major contender for this category. Okay, now jumping into the Best Editing category, my first prediction is going to go to Oppenheimer, and it's important to note for this editing category that they like two things: to be a Best Picture contender and to be a Best Picture front runner, but then also to be really long. Those are sort of the two big factors that they really appreciate. They like nominating movies that are long in length. So you have that with Oppenheimer. 3-hour movie, also the Best Picture frontrunner. It also is heavily edited in that there's so much story going on. We're always going back and forth with these places, always introducing new people. It feels like an action movie in many ways because of the rapidness and the pace and the speed of the editing. Has to do so much as well with the story and what it's trying to tell and how sort of quickly this all felt and how it happened. So you have a long movie. That's also, I expect, at least right now, the frontrunner to win for Best Picture. So it should get in for editing. Then I have Killers of the Flower Moon for very similar reasons. It's a Best Picture frontrunner. It's even longer than Oppenheimer at 3.5 hours. It's from legendary editor Thelma Schoonmaker, who does all of Martin Scorsese's films. She's a 3-time winner in this category, so she's very well appreciated. She gets nominated for pretty much every Martin Scorsese movie, or at least every Oscar Martin Scorsese movie. So Best Picture frontrunner, at least of a serious film, will be nominated for Best Picture. Also over 3.5 hours long, so there's an appreciation of you just have to edit all of this footage together, and there's also that extra element of Thelma being so well respected. So I expect a nomination here for Killers of the Flower Moon. Then in my third slot, I went with Poor Things, and this is mostly because of the strength of the film. Every year in this category, there's usually maybe 1 or 2 movies that are appreciated just for their editing, a Baby Driver, a Tick Tick Boom. But most of the time, it's, Green Book will get nominated. Is Green Book a really flashy edited movie? No, not really, but it was the eventual Best Picture winner. So movies that are really well appreciated, because they're so well liked, they'll get into these categories like Best Editing, because people just really like the movie. They want to reward it. And I think Poor Things really is my number 2, number 3 Best Picture contender. There is a world in which it could win Best Picture, but I do think because it's gotten in pretty much everywhere and overperformed at something like the Golden Globes and did well at Critics' Choice nominations, I think that it should be, it's strong enough of a film to just get into editing based on the strength of the film. Then in my fourth slot, I went with The Holdovers. And I sort of put it in here based on the strength of the film. There's not necessarily really flashy or in your face about The Holdovers editing. It's an excellently edited film, but for me this slot was either The Holdovers or Barbie. And for me, they're pretty similar in terms of their chances for Best Picture. I think they both could potentially get in for director, but probably not. I think they both have, 2 acting nominations. Just get in for screenplay. Barbie will have more technical appreciation. So if anything, Barbie's a little bit of a stronger film. But the reason why I went with The Holdovers over Barbie is because I see them as similarly well-liked movies in terms of maybe 4th or 5th slot within the Best Picture race. But I went with The Holdovers over Barbie because Barbie actually got nominated at the Critics' Choice Awards. And now you may go, Connor, so wait, Barbie got nominated at the Critics' Choice Awards, therefore it's not going to get nominated at the Oscars? And yeah, and the reason behind that is in the Best Editing category at the Critics' Choice Awards, since the inception of the awards back in 2009 when they introduced the Best Editing category, every single year there has been at least one movie that was nominated at the Oscars eventually for Best Editing that didn't show up on the Critics' Choice nominations. So Critics' Choice, they usually get about 3 or 4 of the eventual Oscar nominations, but every year, there's one movie that gets nominated at the Oscars that does not get nominated at Critics' Choice Awards. So because The Holdovers did not get nominated at the Critics' Choice Awards, and because all my other nominees did get nominated at the Critics' Choice Awards, I ultimately went with The Holdovers because I thought it was an equally strong Best Picture contender, but it didn't get in for Critics' Choice, and I think the Oscars are going to be like, okay, Barbie got in for Critics' Choice, but we're going to go do something a little bit different. We have a little bit different taste. We're going to nominate a movie like The Holdovers. Maybe simplistic, maybe a little bit silly, but I think it's important to note that the Critics' Choice have never predicted all 5 of the eventual Best Editing nominees at the Oscars. I think that's an important factor. So I wanted to have at least one of my 5 nominees go to a film that was not nominated at Critics' Choice. I went with The Holdovers. And then in my 5th slot, I went with Maestro. And like I mentioned earlier, they usually like to nominate 3 or 4 of the clear frontrunners to potentially win Best Picture. And then in the 5th slot, they'll nominate a Baby Driver, a Tick Tick Boom, or even a movie like Tar, which wasn't really ever a serious Best Picture winner contender, but was nominated for Best Picture and had some interesting editing, and had noticeable editing. In the same way, Maestro, I think, is a similar movie to Tar, in that it does have noticeable editing. It's also well respected. It's going to get nominated for Best Picture, I believe, so that always helps. But it is, of the Best Picture nominees, aside from something like Oppenheimer, I think the most obviously in-your-face edited, because it spans many years. There's sort of an impressionistic style as we float through Bernstein's life and his relationship, and continually, oftentimes, jumping years. You don't necessarily know. There's no time cards of 5 years later. It's just sort of all going on, existing at once. There's also some really thrilling, entertaining sequences in which we have Bernstein, as played by Cooper, really composing, and we're cutting in between the different angles of the composers, but also the instruments, but also reaction shots. And there's quite a few sequences like that that are very sort of grand and operatic and showcase and have that sort of flashy, in-your-face, noticeable editing. And sometimes in these technical categories, it's always the most editing, the most costumes, the most visual effects. Those are the movies that get nominated. And for the Best Editing category, I wanted to predict some movies that I consider the Best Picture frontrunners: Poor Things, Killers, Oppenheimer, but then also predict a movie that was appreciated for its editing. And this year I went with Maestro. And then some possible contenders, my first one being Barbie, because as I mentioned, it could also technically get nominated, and maybe this is the first year in which all 5 of the Oscar nominees for Best Editing also showed up at Critics' Choice Awards. I don't think that's going to happen, so because Critics' Choice predicted Barbie, I'm not predicting Barbie, but maybe Barbie is replaced instead of Maestro. That's totally okay too. For me, I just didn't want to do that because then there is 5 nominees and none of them really have super flashy editing, and that kind of bothered me because every year there's one movie that goes to that kind of a flashy edited film, so it'd be weird to put both The Holdovers and Barbie. But hey, you have to sort of do your own mixing and matching. This one felt right to me. And then my other possible contender is American Fiction, because this could take the slot of The Holdovers as a movie that wasn't nominated at Critics' Choice, that gets in for Best Editing, has that sort of jazzy score, so I think people can associate the editing with that as well, but I also just believe it in the strength of the film as a potential Best Picture winner, technically, as a long shot. I like American Fiction because it did win the Deaf People's Choice Award, so we know it is sort of has that populist appeal. It's also releasing later, in December, not going wide until January, so then that's a positive, where a lot of people aren't going to be seeing the film until right when voting happens, so it's going to have that top of mind awareness. So that's another possible contender too, in terms of a movie that gets in based on the strength of the film. And now jumping into the Best Visual Effects category, my first prediction is going to go to The Creator. This is a movie where its specialty is its visual effects. The fact that it's such a small budget relative to some of the other big blockbusters, and the effects look even better than some of those big blockbusters, I think will be well appreciated with the visual effects branch. They always appreciate realism and sort of blend with CGI and real photography, which this movie does very well. And I think there's going to be an appreciation also for Gareth Edwards, who is the director of the film, whose last film, Rogue One, a Star Wars story, got nominated for visual effects. He also did the Godzilla film. He also did Monsters, which was an earlier sort of independent movie. So in which all of his films really appreciated the visual effects. They all had great visual effects. And even in the press, Gareth Edwards was talking about the effects and what he was able to do in the revolutionary effects that they were able to produce in the film for such a low budget, because he really considers the effects and has it as a main part of his storytelling process. So I think the amount of respect that he's shown to the effects and his supervisor and the team that works on the film, and how much he integrates it within his film, I think will really ring true and be appreciated by the visual effects community. And then my second nomination, I went with Poor Things. And a couple weeks ago, I don't think I would have even had this in my predictions. But because it got in at Critics' Choice, and because I did actually some more digging into it, it makes a lot of sense. Because every year for the visual effects nominations at the Oscars, there are usually movies that are either nominated for Best Picture or are kind of Best Picture type movies. And oftentimes those movies win. You know, First Man, which is a little bit more respected Best Picture type movie, beats out a movie that had no chance of getting nominated for Best Picture, Avengers Infinity War, or Interstellar will win, or Blade Runner will win, or a Best Picture nominee like 1917 will win. Poor Things is really the only movie that I expect to get nominated for Best Picture that isn't contending for a visual effects nomination, so that helps. It always helps to have your movie well liked. And then I also, ended up seeing the film, and when you see the film, you realize, oh, there are quite a bit of visual effects, and they're unique visual effects. They're different. They're a unique use of it, and I think the visual effects branch will appreciate that. That they're not going to nominate every MCU movie and every big blockbuster, that you can also have creative, unique visual effects in this way, in a smaller budgeted film, with the sort of steampunk aesthetic, with the sort of merging of the combination of the animals, with the sort of ship that they have there. It's stylized visual effects. It's a different kind of visual effects than the realism, but I think they'll appreciate it because they like the movie, but then also because of it's almost a different branch, it's another way to use it, and I think they'll be appreciated by saying, you know what, hey, we can do the big blockbusters, but then you can also use visual effects in a creative way, in this way, and we should appreciate that as well, as a different form of visual effects. I think they'll like that. Then, my third prediction, I'm going to go with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Pretty simple. The last two Guardians movies were nominated. The MCU has done very well in this visual effects category at the Oscars. Ever since it started back in 2008 with Iron Man, an MCU movie has been nominated 13 times. It's pretty rare for there to be a year in which an MCU movie is not nominated. But why am I going with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 over something like The Marvels or Ant-Man? Well, quality helps too. When we're looking at the movies that get nominated in this category, Captain Marvel, the first one, didn't get nominated. Thor, Dark World didn't get nominated. What does get nominated? The Spider-Man movie that's well acclaimed, the Avengers movies that are well acclaimed, the Guardians movies that are well acclaimed, and the same thing with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. So the last two got nominated. MCU movies get nominated every single year. This is really the only critically acclaimed MCU movie of the year. I expect Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 to get nominated. Then in my fourth slot, I went with Society of the Snow, which may be a little bit of a surprise to some of you, but as someone who has seen the film, there's a lot of VFX work in the film. Netflix has been putting out a lot of videos talking about the VFX of the film. They utilize that sort of LED screens that a show like The Mandalorian has, so there's a bit of a revolutionary aspect to the VFX. They actually went to the Andes and did a full digital scale of the Andes and then projected those on the screen. So there is an appreciation for realism and accuracy, which the visual effects branch really likes. This is the same branch that gave the award to 1917, a movie that is historical and has, invisible effects in many ways. Society of the Snow also has that sort of invisible aspect to it as well because of its blending and using realism and not going into the middle of the Andes where it's freezing and filming it on location, but making it seem like it was filmed on location using that realistic, seamless visual effects. They like that kind of a style and brand of visual effects, and Society of the Snow is a big movie this year that has that kind of a style. But another movie that has that kind of a style is my fifth pick, which is Napoleon. And I'm a bigger believer in Napoleon than some people. I think it's going to get multiple Oscar nominations. I think some people saw the reviews and immediately, wrote it off. But it is a movie that's a big budgeted historical drama, so it's the type of movie that I think the Oscars, and particularly the technical categories, will appreciate because of the scale of the film. It's also a movie that has a lot of visual effects, particularly with its battle sequences and the various locations that the movie charts. And similarly, like I mentioned with the Society of the Snow, they like the realistic effects that are seamless, that don't necessarily feel like effects. They do like their, superhero movies. So if you're going to have effects, make them be weird and different and bold and unique. But sometimes they also like the blending of the real locations with the effects, not just set extensions, but actually involved in something like a battle sequence, in which those are some of the best parts of the film. So I think there's going to be an appreciation with that as well. Napoleon, it's being released late. It's top of mind awareness. So it's not, a movie that's competing, that was released back in March, for example. So I think Napoleon is a sneaky kind of a type of a film where it's maybe not critically well beloved, but it's still a big budgeted movie from an auteur, historical movie, which they don't always do well, but I think I'm really betting on the sort of realism of its effects to be appreciated by this branch that really appreciates realism. And then my possible contenders, my first one being Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, which got nominated for Best Visual Effects at the Critics' Choice Awards, but I'm not predicting a animated film to be nominated for Best Visual Effects. We've seen animated movies in the past get nominated, something like Kubo and the Two Strings, and a couple years ago Soul got shortlisted for this category. But I just think that the visual effects branch is a little bit too snob-esque in that they don't want to reward an animated film for visual effects because they feel like it's a different kind of a craft, a different appreciation altogether. It's not necessarily visual effects, it's something else entirely. And I think they could have been nominating animated movies for visual effects all the way since Finding Nemo, really, with Pixar and the use of computer-generated imagery in those animated films. But they've always sort of gone away from, that's an animated thing, that's different. Maybe they'll appreciate Across the Spider-Verse because it is such a well-beloved movie, and there's all these great visual effects type sequences in that there's so many multiverses, so there's lots of depth and shading and lighting that this visual effects group worked on to make that sort of comic book 2D, 3D style come to life. I just don't think that this branch will ultimately reward it, though, just because they've never done it before. And I'm not betting on a historical trend to just up and change for this film. I'm not really 100% on that trend just yet. And then my other possible contender is Dungeons & Dragons, Honor Among Thieves, because if they're not going to nominate a movie like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, they'll maybe nominate a movie like Dungeons & Dragons, which has a lot of effects, which uses also some practical effects as well. A lot of the main characters, including the villain, has lots of visual effects in the film, and as a part of her character, so there's maybe an appreciation for that. But I ultimately think because the film is actually in this weird budget situation where it's not like a $250 million top tier visual effects movie like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, it's $150 million, but they're trying to do that, so they have a lot of effects, which is an appreciation, but maybe those effects aren't to the top tier level of a movie that has $100 million more in a budget. So I think there's a weird sort of awkwardness where they may not appreciate it because it's trying to be like one of those movies, but on the cheap. So there's certain corners that they have to cut, and that maybe not be totally appreciated as an artistic achievement by this branch, but as a type of movie that they've rewarded in the past, the big fantasy blockbuster, this is the kind of movie that they reward. So it is definitely a possible contender. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you comment below. Let me know your thoughts on these three categories, your own predictions. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss a video. But as always, Mondays at 12 p.m. Eastern Time is when these videos drop, as well as bonus videos throughout the week now that we're really in the thick of Oscar season. Those will come as a surprise, but you can always guarantee an old Oscar countdown video Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern. We've been doing it for 7 years now, so you can guarantee that. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, stay tuned.